Hey everyone, thank you for joining me here today. I can't wait to talk to this panel. I'm super excited to talk about new pathways for returned citizens, partly because I used to work in this space and I have personally have seen the how effective and essential of support for these folks is. So this panel is also really interesting because you all have kind of intertwined stories and know each other from the last couple of years working. So maybe I'm just going to throw it to, it's probably better for you to just explain this whole twisted story yourself. So Jason, why don't you start us off?
Definitely, it's definitely a pleasure to be here. So thank you for having me. So I'm the remote instruction manager of The Last Mile. My name is Jason Jones, and what The Last Mile is a nonprofit based in San Francisco that its whole mission is to provide opportunities for professional and personal growth for justice impacted individuals through education and technology training. We currently operate in 6, soon to be 7 states, and we serve women, men, and youth. And I'll let Deepti and Ali kind of talk about their involvement.
Would you like me to go? Go for it, Ali.
I think you're muted, Deepti.
There we go.
Yeah, I learned to code while I was incarcerated at San Quentin State Prison. I did 12 years in prison, and towards the end of my prison sentence, I got involved with a program called The Last Mile, which taught me how to write computer code. And just before I paroled, Deepti and team came into the prison and interviewed me for a position at Slack. And now pass it on to Deepti.
So I am Deepti Rahutki.
Wait.
I'm not read yet. There we go. I'm Deepti Rahutki. I lead Slack for Good in Public Affairs. And my involvement in this issue is one of our main programs for Slack for Good is called The Next Chapter, whose goal is twofold. 1, to increase the number of formerly incarcerated individuals in the tech sector, and 2, to shift perceptions on this often overlooked community. And so we started this program about 5 years ago, and I visited San Quentin with our CEO, Stuart Butterfield, and many of his executives. And in that visit, we met both Jason and Ali, and we were frankly just blown away by the talent we saw with everybody in the room, including these 2 gentlemen. And we wanted to figure out how to create a pathway for these folks who clearly were so talented to join us at Slack and our workforce. And that's where the Next Chapter program really begun, was trying to figure out how to make that transition happen. And our first potential apprentice was Ali. He was kind enough to take a chance on us and help us figure out how to build this program.
There we go. Yeah, when I came home, Slack was so gracious to have me. I got to go to one of their all hands and speak, and I was offered a role there, and as I was going through the process, we started noticing things that some friction points, right? Some things that neither I nor the team at Slack had anticipated. And I think that is, one of the big value adds of the Next Chapter at Slack, is that my experience in trying to go into employment helped inform Slack on kind of the changes and the things that needed to happen to make this a seamless process. And then also collaborating with The Last Mile and creating the Next Chapter within has it's been phenomenal. And one of the things I didn't say when I first got on is that I'm a program officer at the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative in our criminal justice reform department, and proud to say that one of the things that CZI funds is the Next Chapter, and that's how much we believe in what's happening, and seeing the engineers graduate, and bringing people from CZI to the graduation. It's just been an awesome experience.
So I want to thanks for sort of explaining this whole sort of, you're all sort of together in this. I think it's wonderful. But I want to figure out, since we've got Jason is leading the programming at Last Mile for this remote learning stuff. Deepti, you're doing it from the Slack department. Ali, we've got you at CZI. It feels like these are all new, like not brand new, but new and evolving roles. And I'm curious how you think the prison system and the systems that surround it have evolved and are evolving over the last couple of years to enable these new roles. Like, what has made it possible to do this today, but it wasn't possible in 2015 or something like that? Maybe Ali, anybody can take that, but Ali, I think that maybe you could speak to that.
Yeah, well, I think when we think of mass incarceration as a whole, the nation is really starting to get it. They're saying this was a failed experiment. It's not working. Our communities are no safer. We have all these people in prison, and for years and years and years, it's really a closed system, and the zeitgeist of our communities were just lock them up, throw away the key. And a lot of DOCs or Department of Corrections across the United States, they're not equipped to get people ready to come home and to thrive. And they really weren't set up for that. So when you think of the role of tech in this, when you ask what has changed, is a lot of Department of Corrections have changed that mantra. A lot of governors have changed that mantra, and projects like the Last Mile and the Next Chapter are kind of showing these public-private partnerships are showing states what is possible if we all collaborate and put our heads together. And then also, when you get philanthropic dollars involved too, then you've got kind of this perfect soup that is producing a wonderful product. And that's the men and women who have gone through the program who are now software engineers.
Yeah, and I think that's a perfect jumping off point, I think, for Jason. Jason, could you maybe walk us through someone who's entering into the Last Mile program, where just from enrollment to meeting someone at Slack, for an interview, and maybe Deepti can pick it up there. But I'd love to hear, just because I don't think people will be familiar with what it actually looks like to take these classes, to get the certifications, to make those communications. Like, who do they talk to? Can you just give us a sort of step-by-step?
Yes. So first they go through an application process, and it's two different things. You have a actual interview, then the application has like some essay questions, some logic problems to see your aptitude for coding. Then once you get into the program, the first thing you do is go through web development, web development fundamentals, which is 6 months. The first 6 months to give you a good core foundation. Then the second half is MERN development, where they really get into full stack back-end MERN development. And then from the very first time that they come in, we really try to embed this culture to humanize them, right? Because I think when it starts with like the language, we don't call none of our learners inmate, convict, even people after when they come home, parolees or anything like that, because the narrative that have been attached to those to those labels have always been negative and dehumanized. And so a lot of the culture shift that we've done in our classroom have been around focusing on humanizing the people that's in our program and having this human-centered design, right? Then we challenge them in healthy ways and try to relate a lot of their lived experience to the coding concepts. For example, this week I just did a lesson about scoping, and I related it to like how their cells or their living quarters is set up, and like the scope that they live in, like only them or their cellie have access to that, to what's in the cell, opposed to like the global scope where in the day room or the yard, everyone has access to it. So just relating finding these wins where we can relate their lived experience of the current situation or current condition to some of these coding concepts that's a little bit abstract and new for someone learning technology. Then once we get towards the end, one thing I'm really excited about rolling out is that we're working on our own technical assessment that we're building inside to give people before they get out, so that we can give our assessment to people and pass it to our reentry department that we have launched recently. And then from that point, the connection with Next Chapter, and Deepti can take it away.
Right. So Deepti, this is where Slack kind of pops in.
There are two big parts of Next Chapter. So first is how we support the individuals who are being trained to be engineers. And the second, which I think is equally important, is the cultural change program that happens within the companies. So most people in tech have no exposure to people who have been impacted by a criminal justice system, even though there are over 2 million people who are incarcerated. So we need to first make sure the company has shifted their culture to make sure that the apprentices and future software engineers can thrive. So they don't use terms like felon or ex-con, right? They are supportive. It's become a great environment. And frankly, people need to understand why this country has gotten into the place it is with our criminal justice system. So there's a lot of education that happens within the companies. Second, for the apprentices, is they go through Hack Reactor, which is considered to be one of the best boot camps. So before they even interview at the company, so now our partners are Square, Zoom, and Dropbox, they have to pass a fundamentals test to show that they have the aptitude to get through the program. Then they interview at the companies, just like any regular software engineer would interview. They get through the interviews, they're picked, they go through Hack Reactor, and then they join the companies. While they're at the companies, they're coached. So they have executive coaches, they have mentors, they have a technical director who supports them with their code as they're learning. So there's just a lot of support around to make that transition from being incarcerated to a place where you're sitting next to Harvard, Stanford grads who all have masters in engineering. That's a big leap. So we want to make sure they have everything they need to be supported. And that's how we've built the program.
Gotcha. And I want to sort of double down on something that you mentioned earlier, the question of getting people close to the work. You mentioned that, like, getting people close to the work, it's a big part of changing the culture, changing people's minds, and getting them to see what is actually happening here. Can you maybe explain a little more, Deepti, and then anybody else who wants to hop in, what that means to get people close to the work?
Sure.
What does that actually constitute?
So, I mean, it stems from Brian Stevenson, the brilliant founder of EJI, Equal Justice Institute, who wrote the book Just Mercy. He talks about getting proximate to the issue. And so for us, it's involved taking over 200 Slack employees to San Quentin to help shift their perceptions of what somebody who is incarcerated is capable of, explaining to them what it means, like all the obstacles that you have to go through once you are released, right? And it's just really getting an education on this issue that nobody has, or very few people within the tech community have exposure to. And once you get close to the issue and you realize these are just people, they made a mistake, they've served their time, and it's time to move on and give them the opportunities that they deserve, then we've seen massive shifts from fear to love. And that's what we're trying to do. Mm-hmm. So it's really important for what we've seen is to get people really close to the issue.
Yeah. And Ali, you're at CZI now, and Ali, you're doing it's the Justice Accelerator. You're advising on that fund, right? This huge fund. That's super cool. Can you tell us a little more about what you and the fund are going to be focusing on, and whether there are any of those cultural changes that you're trying to affect at CZI or the fund?
Sure. So CZI is sunsetting its criminal justice work within the organization. So I am an advisor to Ana Zamora, who is leading the fund. The fund has seed funding from CZI of $350 million. We plan to also fundraise for the fund. Really want to move a lot of resources into the field quickly. It's one of those things where, like, the criminal justice reform work, CZI is a baby. It's a new organization. And when our team got involved with this work, it took off like a rocket ship. And it's time for us to, like, graduate from grade school and move into college with this fund. So it's really exciting. It's really exciting for the field. It's really exciting for criminal justice reform. It's really exciting for formerly incarcerated and system impacted people, because this is one of the few times in history where a fund, I think it is the only time in history, where a fund has been advised by someone, and I mean a fund, I mean something as significant as this, advised by people who are system impacted. And, there's this old mantra, people that are closest to the problems are closest to the solutions. And I really believe that. I really believe that, people who have been through the system, people who are system impacted, really need to not only, have a seat at the table, but have a compelling voice in this work. And it extends not only to the work that my colleagues, I guess, people that I've done time with who are now working in the tech sector. We're all together in this. I mean, you'd be surprised. CZI is a tech-based philanthropy. You'd be surprised how much technology and how many ideas come out of the formerly incarcerated realm that are like in practice. There's a bunch of products that are out there. R3 Score is one of them. There's a huge list. I'm not going to go on and on, but.
No, it's okay. You can go on and on. But if you could, like when you say deploying a lot of resources, putting a lot of resources into the field, can you be specific? Like what does that mean when you say, I mean, you've got hundreds of millions of dollars to deploy over many years, I suppose, but what does that mean to put resources in the field? For you, what are the priorities?
Well, I think, we are still, this work is nascent. This is a new organization. We're still, we have to build a board of directors. We have to come up with a strategic plan. We have to get that strategic plan approved. But, what I can say is at CZI, our mission is decarceration and second chances. And, I'm pretty confident that most of that work will move over into transition into the Justice Accelerator Fund.
Gotcha. Jason, I want to go to you with some questions about basically expanding the program. Like, how do you said you're working in 7 states right now. How do you expand the program to different states when there are massively different systems, different cultures? You're going to, women's facilities, youth facilities. That has to be really complicated and difficult. How do you manage those as to get the same quality of outcomes that you're used to getting?
Yeah, so Ali spoke to it a little bit, and what we do, we have a sort of like a franchise model and approach when we go into expanding into any state, and that's a combination of getting buy-in from top down, meaning from the governor, from the commissioner, from the people that's really making decisions, and then finding a private or philanthropic company that can help with some of the funding. Like, for instance, Ali with CZI, they helped with us expanding to Oklahoma, right? They helped with the funding, and it was a partnership. And when we launched, it was at the time the highest incarcerated state for women in the world, right? In just a matter of months. And I remember one of our board members, MC Hammer, talking to Governor Stint and kind of like raising that statistic up, right? Like that they got the highest incarceration for women. In a matter of months, they did the biggest commutation still to this day, right? Where, I think it was like correct me if I'm wrong, Ali, it was like 500 people got commuted, and a lot of our learners was part of that commutation and got out, right? So the approach that we take is just like Ali said, this private and public partnership that really helps with the lift as far as the funding side. But then when it comes to our program and implementing our program, we control our program, right? We know what works. Right, and a lot of the lived experience that we have, half of our staff is formerly incarcerated, came out of our program. So who better to understand the experience of our learners than people that actually been in their seats, right? Mm-hmm. That from all the way from the help desk that they can get help from the instructors, from the coordinators, from just different people, from our reentry department, right, to the reentry advocates that work with them and help them set their goals and milestones. All people with lived experience. So it really helps understand the dynamics of going through incarceration while you're inside and returning home and finding success however you define it.
Mm-hmm. I want to ask, starting with Deepti, but obviously anybody can answer. Do you think that the tech industry has unique systemic barriers to bringing in people with incarceration in their history? As opposed to, service industry, every retail, all these other tech has evolved so quickly and is so technical an industry. I wonder whether it's especially hard or perhaps otherwise.
I don't think it's hard. I think there are some legal barriers. A lot of contracts and a lot of industries have rules around people with prior felony convictions. touching customer data. So it's eminently workable. But you do need to take a look and make sure you aren't violating any laws. And once you figure that out, then it's just a culture shift and opening your mind. And the reality is, like, the tech industry has the resources. They just need the courage to do it. And so I do think the tech industry is uniquely suited to be a leader in this space.
And Jason and Ali, have you experienced that as well, or can you speak to the any unique challenges in the tech industry?
Well, there's 30,000 collateral consequences to having a criminal conviction in the United States. Every state is different, and every state has its different rules and regulations, but all tabulated all together, 30,000. So across the board, it is hard for system impacted or formerly incarcerated people to move into the workforce. Tech does, like Deepti was saying, have some unique challenges around data, and there's some federal laws around the type of conviction you have, whether it's wire fraud or things like that, and the type of industries that you can work in. And a lot of those policies are blanket policies. And so I think as we move forward with projects like the Next Chapter and Slack and the Last Mile, it's also incumbent upon us to look to our electeds and say, hey, you've got to start taking down some of these barriers that just don't make sense, right? If you got caught, stealing from a store 5 or 6 times and ended up in prison, but then you're working on building a website, like there's no correlation there, which should preclude you from doing that type of work. And so there's a lot of barriers that just don't make sense, and it's incumbent upon us to highlight those barriers. And there's a lot of policy and advocacy work out there in the legislative realm that's working in conjunction with projects like this. We've done a lot of work around Clean Slate, which does automatic record expungement, which has a technical component of itself. But it's one of those things where I think that the narrative behind projects like this, the Last Mile, and seeing MC Hammer on national TV with Kevin Skitt, that narrative shift in conjunction with legislative, in conjunction with these type of programs, is really what's making the difference in the United States. And I'm confident projects like this have the capability to scale nationally.
And if it's okay for me to add to that, I think one thing that's really important is proving the model, right? So if Slack can do it, why can't Zoom, Square, or Dropbox? And it turns out they can. And if Zoom, Square, and Dropbox can do it, why can't other companies, right? So the idea that it's impossible, you can't say that anymore. You can't say it's not possible to do it. You can. And 4 very big, not massive, but 4 big tech companies are doing it. So I feel like the impossibility of making the significant change and making systemic change within the tech sector seems completely doable to me, because we've proven it's possible.
Yeah. Jason, did you want to jump in there?
Yeah, if I can add anything to it, I think one of the barriers that I've seen that is starting to change is including this community that's coming out of incarceration under the scope of DEI. Right, under the scope of diversity. I think a lot of times, tech companies, when they look at diversify, it's cosmetic diversity, being Black and brown, but not actual lived experience. And I think that's one of the other barriers that's being broken down from programs like Next Chapter and from CZI and stuff like that, because you have people with lived experience that's really ingrained in some of the decision making and creating these pathways. And then one of the solutions I'm really excited about that we're starting to really flush out is that, since we have access to remote into our classrooms, now we're getting tech companies to volunteer, engineers, designers, and everything else from Google, from Bank of America, from Verizon, that actually can get approximate to like Deepti said, to the population, to the community inside. And this is even during COVID, right? Our program was still able to run because of this tech component, even during COVID, where we were still able to have volunteers come and meet the people inside.
I'd be remiss if I didn't say that Deepti, when you talk about breaking down barriers, I remember speaking at Slack at an all hands, and then speaking with Deepti after, and going through kind of the recruiting process and seeing like those friction points, and just watching Deepti at work. I mean, just breaking down these barriers, going to other tech companies, talking to other CEOs and saying, no, you can't do this. Look, we did this. This works. Come on, get on board. I mean, it takes, we need 10,000 more Deeptis in this world to scale. And there's a Deepti in every company. And it's like, just let your passion out, and just watching Deepti going, no, this is a aspect of society that's wrong, and we're going to fix it. It's been an amazing journey.
You're far too kind, Mr. Tambora. It's the mama bear in me.
Well, I'm just not going to feel bad about putting you on the spot then, and say, what are some things that have worked for you when you're talking to these other companies, when you're opening these discussions? A commenter in an earlier panel was asking, how do you start that conversation? How do you get the people who are the stakeholders and the ones in power to even start talking about this?
Yeah. I mean, it was a challenge at first. I will definitely say a lot of people told me no, and that it was impossible. But I'm lucky enough to work for Stuart Butterfield, who truly believes in this and making this happen a priority. And then I think second is we took a lot of people to San Quentin. And I think that made the biggest difference when you meet the people you're trying to help, and they're not some abstract figment of your imagination of what you've seen on TV. They are brilliant people who would make your company better and would make great code. And when you see that talent, it's really hard to not want to help. And so I think, thank God, the last mile exists and was able to facilitate those interactions. And I mean, now we have a wait list of companies who want to join Next Chapter, right? Like we don't want to scale too fast because these are people, and we're very intentional, and everyone is going to be great and succeed from my perspective. But it's frankly just powering through and showing the humanity of the folks that people might have a preconceived notion about.
Yeah. And I think that's a good jumping off point maybe for Jason to talk a little about the actual curriculum. How has that been affected by the feedback that you've received from companies, from people who have graduated, who have gotten those interviews? How does that affect the actual curriculum that you offer, the code, the code bases that you work with, the classes that you're offering? I'm curious about the actual nitty gritty. Like, are you teaching SQL? Are you teaching back end stuff, web development stuff? Like I think that a lot of people are kind of curious, like, what are these classes?
Yeah. So like I spoke about earlier, our foundation is JavaScript. We teach JavaScript for a year long, and that's from all the way from front end all the way to back end Node and MERN stack, right? For the youth, it's a little bit different. We teach a lot of design because their sentences are shorter and different than adults. So it's a different situation. So we tailor the curriculum for them, which we just rolled out our youth curriculum this year, and it's been great. I think a couple other things that we incorporated, because a lot of the feedback when our return citizens get out and go to technical interviews and get into their jobs and like giving us feedback on how we can better prepare people, we implemented the use of GitLab. So they're using GitLab every day. From day one, they pulling down the lesson plans, they pulling down the repos, and they pushing up, and they're able to use it every day, their merge requests and everything else. We implemented at the end of the course a thesis project where we open up the curriculum, they start to teach themselves Python and SQL and everything else, and incorporate it into their capstone, and then in their thesis project, make their arguments about the trade-offs, right? To help them position themselves in a good position when they go to technical interviews to talk about their projects and some of the reason, explain some of the choices that they made in those projects. Another thing that we wanted to take into account from just feedback from our return citizens was some of the things that's non-technical that you have to learn when you get out, right? I was one of them. I never had a California ID. I never had a driver's license. I never had a bank account. Never had none of that. This is the first time I did. And when I got into a tech job, one of the things that was really daunting for me was understanding what a 401k is, understanding benefits, all that. So now we give those kind of training for the soft skills side. We give trainings about resumes, cover letters, how to structure emails, stuff like that, professional communication, financial literacy. right? That's been really big to help people when they come home, understanding what credit is, all these different things that's like wraparound services in our reentry department that we really are ramping up on.
And that sounds fantastic. That sounds like a better education than I got in code when I was looking at it. And that this all has been super fascinating. We're out of time, but I want to thank you all for joining us. And also I want to thank you personally for what you do, because I know how important it is. And I really hope for more success going forward for your programs. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.